Are you wondering where do these layers in the Docker images come from? I'm going to give you an answer to that in this video. You write a Docker file and then you launch an image build process using the Docker image build command such as this. An output of that looks like this, and it shows you a step-by-step run of your Docker image build process. You could examine the layers that are generated as part of this image using a Docker image history command. If you are wondering where do these layers now come from and how are they created, the answer to that is in the Docker file. If you observe the number of instructions here, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I have 10 instructions here. So I should have gotten 9 layers out of this basically, because everything except for from, all of these get converted into a layer each. And that's what you would see: work directory, copy, run, again work directory, run, expose, environment, CMD. You'll see that here. Work directory, copy, the run command, again work directory, the run command, expose, work directory, environment, CMD. So how many layers in total created? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that answers it. So how images are created is using the Docker file, the automated process, and how the layers are generated is via the Docker instructions. So you can control the number of layers that you create and how they are created, what makes up a layer, all through the source, which is this Docker file. Now here comes the most exciting part of this process. Now when you run a Docker build command, what actually happens is an iterative image build process. Now let's take an example of a simple Docker file. I'm going to pick only a few instructions. Your Docker file can be really long, but I'm just talking about a few. So let's take the first instruction being from. The second instruction that we would add is a work directory, after which we would copy over the source code using, let's say, a copy instruction. Then we would do some build and install and configuration inside the container using run, and then finally provide the CMD. Now let's take an example of this Docker file and let's find out how an image is built using this iteratively. Because when you run Docker build command and provide this Docker file as an input, it starts executing these instructions one step at a time. Step number 1 would be from. So it's going to read that from instruction, and it actually is going to use that image defined with from as a base image. Let's take an example of this base image, which has about 4 layers to it. So this image is pulled then on the Docker host. And let's again emphasize the point that it has 4 layers. We're talking about how layers are created. Now using this as a base, an intermediate container would be created, to which Docker build process would also copy over the build context. Build context is nothing but whatever is in the current directory when you run the Docker build process, or whatever is in the path which you provide as a build context at the end of the Docker build command. And then inside this intermediate container, a work directory is executed. Work directory is added actually, and that creates a layer by committing that intermediate container to a new intermediate image. Now when this image is built, it's gonna add this one more layer to it, because the earlier it was just 4 layers. Now this image would contain 5, with the layer for the work directory now added to this image. Now every instruction is executed this way. Now we have 4 layers, and then that intermediate container goes away and a new one is created using this intermediate image now. And what happens here? It follows the process. So it goes and looks at the next instruction, which is going to be, as you have seen and noticed, it's copy. So it would run that copy instruction, copy over the source code or whatever, and then commit this into a new intermediate image, which creates one more layer. So now our intermediate image, this new one, would have 6 layers to it. One for the 4 for the base image, 1 for the work directory, 1 for the copy. And this is the process which keeps on iterating. So now after this copy, there would be the turn of the run instruction. And then for the run instruction, again an intermediate container number 3 would be created. The run instruction would be executed inside that, and that container would then be committed into a new image that is gonna be another interim image with the 7 layers. And it's turn for our last instruction in our Docker file, that is the CMD. So using this, another intermediate container is created. The CMD is added to this as just a metadata and then committed into another layer, another image. Now this image would contain the 8 layers, and this is a final image because all the instructions have been executed iteratively, and this image is what is then tagged with whatever version and the tag that you provide. The tag typically contains the user or the namespace, user, project or organization, the repository, colon, the version. And that is how this iterative build happens, and that's what is the secret to the image layers. And you could examine this iterative process by running docker build again. So when I run docker build again, what actually happens this time though is it picks up the cache, picks up everything from the cache, because if there is no change in the Docker file or if there is no change in the source code, Docker does not repeat the same process over and over again, because it has that intelligence to know that, oh, this is the same instruction, the same code, so you can just use the cache. So it generates the build cache for the first time when you run that container build, and it is going to continue using the cache so to optimize and to save the time for the subsequent Docker image build commands. Now if you want to see that iterative process to happen and the image build to actually proceed, you could also use the no cache. There is an option called as no cache set, and you can set this to true to the Docker image build process, and now you would actually see the image build happen again, starting with the from instruction, and then you see the intermediate containers. So this proves the point that there have been intermediate containers generated, and you'll see this again and over again. For every instruction, it creates a intermediate container, runs the instruction, deletes it, then it goes to the next instruction, and then it removes the intermediate container again, then it launches new one. You see the images being built. These are the intermediate images also. So these are the intermediate images which are being built, and for every instruction it generates a new layer this way. And this is the secret sauce to build the images with multiple layers using the Docker file and leveraging the iterative build process.